Today we're going to talk about how I lost my daughter and my preterm labor at only 21 weeks due to incompetent cervix. So let's start by talking about what exactly is incompetent cervix. Incompetent cervix is when your cervix can't hold an otherwise healthy pregnancy. Basically, the weight of the baby, your cervix can't support it. There are lots of reasons of why you could possibly have incompetent cervix, things like just genetic issues, but also people who tend to have had like D&Cs and lots of LEEP procedures. Anything basically done to your cervix can affect your cervix in the future, especially when you're having a baby. So things like that can usually lead to incompetent cervix. But that's not always a guarantee, because sometimes you have people like me. I've never had anything done to my cervix. I've never had a LEEP procedure. I've never had a D&C or anything like that besides like a normal pap smear or anything like that. I've never had anything done to my cervix, and I still ended up with incompetent cervix. So let's start from the beginning. I actually have PCOS, and I thought that would be my biggest issue when it came to getting pregnant. I thought I might not be able to get pregnant. I was really worried about it because I had never actually tried to get pregnant before. So when I started trying for my daughter, when we decided to try, I was super nervous that I wouldn't be able to get pregnant right away because of my PCOS. But that actually ended up not being my biggest problem this pregnancy. So when I started trying for my daughter, I actually got pregnant the first month that I tried. I used an at-home ovulation test that told me when I was ovulating, my peak days for ovulation, and it was right on point. We baby danced twice a day for my 3 highest days that I was most likely to ovulate, and boom, the first month we found out we were pregnant with my daughter. From week 1 to week 20 was a completely normal pregnancy. There were no issues at all. My daughter was in perfect health. She passed all the Down syndrome tests, and every scan she passed with flying colors. So from week 1 to 20, it was pretty much a normal pregnancy.
Right there, that's baby's heartbeat. Right there. This is the yolk sac right here.
In the video, the flickering is a heartbeat.
A little flicker right there. Keep the air. Now you just gotta let this little one grow. When I went for the Down syndrome scan, they kind of pushed a little to get her to stretch out, and she actually threw her hands straight down and put her feet all the way out. That was the first time I ever seen the baby completely legs all the way stretched out. Normally she's kind of how's the heartbeat? The rate. Yeah.
At 19 weeks, we did an anatomy scan with my daughter and everything looked fine. My cervix was nice and long. It was the perfect length. The lady said, she was like, everything looks great. And they did say that they would forward, my anatomy scan to my doctor. Obviously, my doctor had to review everything and just confirm that everything looked normal. But even at that time, everything was normal. That next week on Monday was the day that I changed weeks every week. So on Monday, I turned 20 weeks and still everything was fine. That weekend, I went to the bathroom and I just went to pee, a little TMI, but you guys are gonna see kind of how this story unfolds after that. So I went to use the bathroom, and when I went to wipe, I had a lot of cervical mucus. It literally stretched all the way from me. I could have held the tissue out here and there was a long string of cervical mucus. And I thought it was weird, but at that point, all my pregnancy apps had told me that I might see an increase in cervical mucus. So I was kind of like, ew, gross. I've never seen this much mucus before. And it was like snot or something. But I had never seen that much cervical mucus. And I thought it was odd. But then I remembered like, oh, all the pregnancy apps said I might see an increase in cervical mucus. Now, in hindsight, I was actually losing my mucus plug at this point. But at that point, I didn't know. I just thought it was an increase in cervical mucus. So throughout that day on Saturday, I started to feel like wet. That was the best way to describe it. I mean, I was pregnant and I knew it wasn't like that pregnant to where I like peed on myself, but I felt like really moist, and I had never felt that before my entire pregnancy. So I called the nurse hotline. I talked to them. They said that it seemed pretty normal, and it could just be, sometimes when you're pregnant, you get a lot of juices flowing and a lot of stuff going on down there. So they'll tell you kind of like that can happen, but as long as it's not like leaking, it seems fine. So on Sunday, the next day, I continued to feel a little moist. I just wore a panty liner, but it wasn't wasn't a lot of fluid or anything like that. And it wasn't discolored. There was no blood. There was no nothing. So they were saying it might be totally fine, and to like sit on the toilet and see if there was any constant leaking, which there was not. So I thought it was okay. So now this is 2 days that I've been feeling like this moist feeling. The next day on Monday, I started to get a little concerned when the moist feeling did not stop. I called the nurse hotline again, and they told me to again check, see if there was any constant leak, and if not, it was okay. They told me if I did feel like it, that I could come into triage and see somebody, but I kind of just kept my eye on it. I was working all day and I still felt normal. My panty liner still did feel a little moist, but I was at my desk and I went to print out something, and when I stood up to go to the printer, I actually felt a wet puddle on the back of the dress I had on. At that point, I knew I was leaking more fluid of whatever the sort that it was, and that I needed to go to triage immediately. So I left work and I went to the women's hospital. And I remember at this point, I had just turned 20 weeks. So I get to the hospital. They say, okay, I tell them what's going on. And I told them, like, I'm sure I did not pee on myself. I know I did pee on myself. I'm pregnant, but I'm not that pregnant at this point. I'm only 20 weeks. I'm not peeing on myself. Something is coming out, whatever it is. So they go ahead and test me to see if it's amniotic fluid. And my test actually came back negative, saying it wasn't amniotic fluid. So we kind of went over everything. They just ran some blood and they said everything was fine. They said it just might be moisture in my vagina from everything going on. And they actually were about to send me home. The doctor actually came in to go over everything, and she decided to actually do a manual check. I had mentioned to her that they hadn't checked me for dilation. And she was a little surprised, and she's like, let's just check you just in case before you walk out here and go home. But she confirmed again that the test did not show it was positive for amniotic fluid. So the doctor actually gave me a manual check, and when I say her face dropped, at that moment, I knew something was not right. So she doesn't say anything, but she says, you know what, can we go into the next room where the ultrasound is? She said, I'm gonna move you in here. I wanna see something. So like I said, I had a feeling that something wasn't right. I could tell by the expression on her face. So we went over into the next room and she did an ultrasound, and I was asking her, is everything okay? Does everything look fine? Like, I saw the way your facial expression changed. And she was like, wow, I thought I felt that. And she actually let me know in the moment that when she went to manually check me, she was rubbing my daughter's head. So at that point, it had been 3 days. This is now the 3rd day of basically me being in labor and not even knowing it. My daughter's head was literally coming out. So they called in another perinatal doctor and they talked to themselves about kind of what they were going to do. They let me know that my options at that point, they wanted to test to see, because I was already open, if I had some type of infection. But of course, doing an amnio at that point might rupture my sac if it wasn't already ruptured. Because at this point, they thought I still wasn't leaking amniotic fluid. So that was a little bit of a scary option. They also let me know that they would admit me and wait like a day or two and see if I started to spike a fever or show them any signs that I had an infection. If I didn't, they would go ahead and do an emergency cerclage. So we decided to admit me and go ahead and wait the day or two, try to see if everything will they kept me elevated and tilted back to kind of slide my daughter back a little bit before the cerclage and just make sure that I didn't have an infection. A couple of days went by and I actually didn't have an infection. I didn't start having a fever or any signs of an infection at all. So they decided they would skip the amnio, and they felt confident enough to skip the amnio, and they would go ahead and give me an emergency cerclage. Now at this point, I was scared to death. Like, before this, nothing was wrong with my pregnancy. I was so confused how I could go from 19 weeks having a perfectly long cervix, everything looking amazing at my anatomy scan from head to toe on my daughter, to now here I am at 20 weeks, just 1 week later, and I'm in the hospital trying to save my daughter's life. How does that happen? How does that happen? I was so confused, but in that moment, I just was ready to do whatever it took to save my daughter. So I told them to go ahead and give me the cerclage. So they came and gave me the spinal, and they got me ready to go into surgery. Once we went into surgery, I was shaking. I was so nervous. I just wanted my daughter to be okay. I was a little bit nervous for me, but more just nervous for my daughter. I knew that there was a chance that they could rupture my sac while they were doing the cerclage, which is why they kept me tilted and tried to slide her back. So I was a little nervous about that. But at that point, that was my only choice. So I went ahead with it. The doctor came in to start the procedure, and as soon as she put the duckbill clips in me and opened them up, she closed it right away. She came back around the side of the table, and unfortunately, she told me that as soon as she opened up that duckbill clip, amniotic fluid started coming out. At this point, they realized that my bag was already ruptured. So there was no way at this point that I could get an emergency cerclage no matter what. At that point, the risk of infection was the first thing on everybody's mind. There was no way I could get a cerclage. I was gonna have to try to come up with a solution to keep my daughter in. So they sent me back to my room. And for that night, that was all they did. There was no real answers that night at all. The next day, a perinatal doctor came in to have what they call a really difficult conversation. Basically, they told me at that point, we were out of options. My bag was already ruptured, meaning that I was already at risk of getting an infection if I didn't already have one. And also that was for me and my daughter. I could get an infection and the baby could get an infection. They had lost the ability to give me a cerclage to keep her in even longer. So at this point, I'm 21 weeks because it's been a few days that I've been in the hospital. I turned 21 weeks and my bag is ruptured. They can't do a cerclage and I haven't even reached viability yet. I'm 21 weeks and viability starts normally about 23 to 24 weeks, depending on the hospital you're at. But I was still 3 weeks away from even a chance of them intervening to save her. So at this point, me and her dad had to make the hardest decision I've ever made in my life. My daughter was losing fluid and there was nothing they could do to stop it. I was at risk of getting an infection and either becoming septic and losing my life as well, or never being able to have kids again if I got an infection so bad that they had to give me a hysterectomy. I would have never had a chance to have any other kids in this lifetime. And me and her dad just broke down. We didn't know what to do. And the doctor is sitting there telling us, like, I know this is really hard, but at this point, she is not at viability. There was no way my daughter was going to make it. And even if I did say, okay, it's worth it for me to risk my life to try to save my daughter, at that point, I was 3 weeks away from viability. 3 weeks. I probably would have died from an infection before I even reached 24 weeks. And then even right at 24 weeks, there was no guarantee that she was going to make it. You can have so many problems. Like right at 24 weeks, a lot of people have the goal of reaching viability, which is good because then that means your baby has a chance. The hospital can intervene and give them assistance if needed. But it doesn't mean that there's a guaranteed rate of survival at 24 weeks. There's people who've had babies at 25 weeks, 26 weeks, 27 weeks, and still had brain bleeds and other issues that cause their babies to still lose their life. So at that point, I would be risking my life or even giving my life, and my daughter was probably not going to make it anyways. So we were posed with the difficult decision of choosing to deliver my daughter. At that point, nature had took its course. We had prayed, we had cried, and everything we tried to do to save her, it failed. So there was no real purpose in losing us both at that point. So I made the difficult decision to actually deliver my daughter, knowing that that was going to be the end and this would not go on to be a successful pregnancy and that she was not going to be able to stay here with us. So at that point, I consulted with my aunt, who's a doctor, and she kind of confirmed everything the doctor said. She went over all the information with the doctor and confirmed, with me that what they were saying was correct. And kind of if she was in my shoes or her daughter was in my shoes, she would make the same decision, as hard as it was. So I actually chose to go ahead and get induced and deliver my daughter. Now, when you have a preterm loss that's that late, like a second trimester loss, there is no D&C at that point. You have to full on deliver just like any other baby. So at that point, they gave me the Pitocin to start my labor and get everything going.
Stay inside just a little bit longer, baby. And I promise to hang in there just a little bit longer. I promise I'll do everything I can to make sure you're okay. Just stay inside a little bit longer. It's too early, baby. I love you. Mommy loves you so much. No matter what happens, just know that I love you more than anything else in the world. And I would do anything for you. I just want you to be okay.
doses of Pitocin in a few hours. Ayani Janae was born on August 15th, 2019 at 2:54 a.m. I have never seen anybody more beautiful than my daughter. I was like amazed and in shock that I could even create someone so beautiful. It was the most beautiful moment of my life, as hard as it was to know that I was going to have to deliver her and that she would not stay earthside with us. Delivering her was just amazing. I got to hold her. She was born alive, so she did have a heartbeat, and it's called what they call a compassionate death. They basically wrap the baby up, they clean the baby, and you get to hold the baby, and they check every like 15 minutes or so to see if the baby still has a heartbeat. Some babies, when they're that small, actually do not survive the birthing process because it's so intense. So some of them are already born sleeping, but my daughter actually had a heartbeat when she came out, and you know, I got to hug her and I got to kiss her and touch her, and I was so sad. It's just funny. I was saying like, I'll never get to see her grow up. I'll never get to hear her voice. I'll never get to, hear her laugh. I'll never even get to see her smile. And for the slightest moment, my daughter's mouth kind of turned up on the side, almost like a little tiny smile on her face. And it just brought so much comfort to my heart, because I felt like I was robbed of my experience. I was robbed of my opportunity to have a child. I was robbed of my opportunity to have a mother, to be a mother, but in that moment, I got one of those little things that I said that I was, never going to get. And it was just, as hard as it was a beautiful moment. She was alive for a little over an hour, and I enjoyed every single moment of that hour with her until, they took her away when her heart finally stopped. After you deliver your baby and your baby passes away, you have to basically go through the process of like any other person who dies in the hospital or anywhere else. The hospital takes the baby down to the morgue. They actually let you keep the baby in your room as long as you want to. So it's up to you as the mother. You can literally keep your baby in your room for 2 days if you want, or you can send the baby down to the morgue. And if you change your mind, they'll actually bring the baby back up to you. I was at a women's hospital, so this was their policy. I'm not sure about all other hospitals. I can't speak to that. But at this women's hospital, they let you keep your baby as long as you want. After your stay, when you get ready to go home, you do have to make funeral arrangements for your baby to be picked up by a funeral home, just like any other body of a deceased person. They have to actually come and pick your baby up. So when I went home, I was just numb. It almost didn't seem real what had just happened in these 5 days that I spent in the hospital. It was like, there's no way that this just happened. That like I left the hospital, but I didn't leave with the baby. And my daughter was still at the hospital while I was home. And I was like touching my stomach, and I just was like, there's no more baby in there. Like, I'll never feel her kick again. I'll never feel her like, in the morning when I wake up, she's not gonna be in there anymore waking up. Like, I didn't even know how to deal. I just felt numb. That's the best expression. I just cried all day. My daughter's dad tried to comfort me like as much as he could, but it just at that point there was nothing anybody could say, nothing anybody could do. I had cried so much and prayed so much. I was devastated. And after, I was really mad for a long time. You go through kind of like this cycle of grief, and you're kind of sad for a long time. You just cry all day. Then you're angry. Then you start kind of like replaying every second in your mind, feeling like, what happened? Where did it go wrong? How did I not notice that? In a way, I felt like I failed her. Like I was her mom. I was supposed to notice something wasn't right. I was supposed to know that something was wrong. And I dealt with that feeling for a long, long, long time. It took over a year of therapy and a lot of work to really come to grips with what had happened and start to move on. For anyone who has had a preterm loss recently or even years ago that you're still struggling with, the biggest suggestion I could give you is to go talk to someone. Going to therapy completely changed my outlook on the whole situation. And no, it doesn't necessarily heal you or change what happened, but it gives you tools you need to get through life living with what happened to your child and dealing with the loss that you felt, because the loss is real. It doesn't matter if you lose a baby at 8 weeks or 28 weeks, it hurts. It's okay to be disappointed, to be angry, to be upset, to question why. I was angry at everybody. Angry at myself, angry at God. I couldn't realize how, I just couldn't come to grips with how someone who's supposed to love me so much could be so cruel. How could you take the one thing that meant everything to me? And it took a lot of work to get through that, a lot of work. And even to this day, it's now been almost 2 years since I lost my daughter. And I can say I'm just now starting to feel like I'm okay, or at least I'm at peace with it. It was the hardest thing that I've ever had to deal with in my life. And 2 years later, I'm just at the point where I can talk about her and not cry and not just completely break down when I look at her pictures. And even if you did still cry, that's okay. But I'm just kind of getting to a point where I'm truly happy and I'm truly at peace with the situation. And I may not ever be okay with it, but I can accept that that was what was meant to be. Maybe she was just too perfect for this earth and she just was not meant to stay. But everything that I learned through the process of losing her, learned about myself, about her dad, about just everything, even just learning how strong of a person that I am to be able to get through something like that. I couldn't trade that for anything in the world. Obviously, if I could have my daughter here, I would in a heartbeat. I'll probably spend the rest of my life missing her, and that's just not anything that's ever going to change. But I can live with what happened. And, I'll be okay with that. And at the hospital, they did give me, I have a whole bunch of mementos. I'll show you guys a few. I don't share pictures of my daughter. That's just a personal choice. I think everybody has the right to do what they're comfortable with. For me, I feel like there are so many moments in my daughter's life that I'll never get to witness. So just those keepsakes that I have are just for me. And that's the way I feel about it. But I will share some of the things with you guys. Most hospitals give you an entire package when you go home. They dress your baby up. They take pictures of the baby and everything. I got to keep her hospital bracelet. So I still have that. And I have all my other bracelets. I have the little hat that they gave her and also her dress. She was actually in this when she passed away and they went and took her to take pictures. So these are the real clothes that my daughter was wearing and I can still smell it. I have it in a sealed container so I can still smell it and everything. They even gave me the little blanket that they wrapped her up in. And sometimes, I used to just cry with this blanket and it used to comfort me. And I used to just keep it as a keepsake. All of these things I keep, and I know that I'll always have them and I can always go back to them if I ever want to later in life and just, remember her and look at her pictures, and I will never forget her. If you have recently had a loss, like I said, my biggest suggestion would be to talk to someone and really, see what other people are going through. Also, see if you can find a support group. I joined an Incompetent Cervix support group on Facebook, and that was amazing. It's amazing. And to this day, talking about my daughter really, it doesn't make me sad anymore. It brings me comfort. It's almost like it confirms that it was real. I was pregnant. She was here. It was not a dream. It was not a bad memory or anything like that. And it actually brings me great comfort to talk about her and share my story. Also, just know you're not the only person going through it. You know, sometimes you feel like you hear about things like that, but you never think it'll be you or somebody you know until it happens to you, and you are one of those people. So talking to other people really can help answer questions, can help give you support and things like that, and just let you know that you are not alone in this. I encourage every mother that's trying to conceive, has had a miscarriage, has had a preterm loss, whether it was 2 weeks pregnant or 20 weeks pregnant, we are all here with you. We're all trying, and you will get your rainbow baby. Just stick in there, okay? Just stick in there. It will happen. There's lots of help out there for you. Don't give up on yourself. Your angel baby would not want to see you give up on yourself. So that is my story of how I lost my daughter, and I will carry her with me for the rest of my life. And I can't wait till the day that she sends, you know, a brother or sister down from heaven. Continue to follow my page. There's going to be more TTC content as I start my journey of trying to have another baby. But for now, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I'll try to answer as much as I can. If they're actual medical questions, I might not be able to help you guys, but I can tell you guys about my experience and what my doctor told me. But always remember, don't go to other people for medical advice. Please go to your doctor and discuss it with your doctor. Don't let people on the internet give you medical advice. Everybody's different. Everybody's situation is different. So please talk to your doctor. But leave some comments down below. Tell me about your incompetent cervix experience. If you had a loss, if you were successful, if you got a cerclage, whatever your story is, put it down in the comments. Let me know, and I look forward to hearing from you guys. See you later. Subscribe now.